opening day, NBAA 2023, and a chance to talk to Mr. Regulation. Part of the industry is up in arms because AEA and others suggested and got 90 days additional time to research MOSAIC.
Yep.
But they're all concerned now that this means MOSAIC's going to be put off at least a decade or whatever the garbage is and so forth and so on. Tell me, what was the modus operandi behind all this and what are you expecting to accomplish?
Well, I think that, first of all, you have to understand that our job is to review what the FAA puts out in a proposal, as it is everybody's. Now, part of our job is to look at what the proposals are. The FAA worked very closely with a number of organizations. We weren't one of them, which is fine. But you have a proposal that on the surface seems very simple and straightforward. You look at Sport Pilot, mom and apple pie, increase the capabilities. This is great. When you look at light sport airplanes, the concept that you and I cannot get into an airplane with a full tank of gas and go fly is contrary to everything I was taught as a pilot. And so the idea that this arbitrary weight is somehow flawed and should be relieved makes total sense. And so from an optics perspective, well, what's the question? The challenge is that there's 9 different regulations that are being amended. The first one being the definition of a consensus standard. We use thousands of consensus standards in aviation. We use them in aviation maintenance. We use them in aviation design. We use them in certification. Some of them are directly accepted by the FAA. Some of them are just industry standards that are adopted by industry. But this new definition compromises that. And so even at the most basic time, you have to go through this proposal, not for the intended consequences, but for the unintended consequences. So here you have a rule that took 10 years to develop. It's gone through a dozen different iterations. There's 1,000 pages of accompanying documents, and we have 90 days to review it, and arguably that's 90 days from the day it hits the street. Well, as we know, we had Oshkosh and other things, and so by the time you actually got into it, you had 60 days left. Well, that's just simply not enough time. That's not to say that it's a bad rule or that there's anything wrong with it or anything else. It just means that you have to be able to give enough time to do a thorough review and honestly a recommendation to make the intended consequences better and the unintended consequences eliminated if possible.
In other words, get it right.
Yeah. You know, when you look at things like, oh, we're going to simply move stall speed from 45 knots to 54 knots. And there is a fundamental increase in weight with that. Arguably, you're looking at about a 182 size aircraft-ish. Well, when you pull that string, and you pull that string to increase the aircraft weight, the aircraft complexity, the market for that aircraft, you're bringing everything with it. You know, theoretically, you're looking at probably replacing 30 to 50,000 airplanes in time, okay? If you look at how many of those airplanes are in the market. Light sport aircraft are the most restricted category aircraft out there. I cannot change brand name instruments without going back to the manufacturer as a major alteration and getting the manufacturer's permission to change a manufacturer of an altimeter.
It's a pain in the butt.
Well, and it's like, do we really want, you know, the entire Class 1 general aviation area that restricted, or should we in fact look at some improvements here? And so it truly is just a matter of peeling the onion to make sure that the intended consequence makes the intent, and the unintended consequences are managed and mitigated. And I mean, in the world of SMS, safety management and risk management, that's what we get paid for.
There's been some complaints from folks out in the light sport industry in particular, especially some of the influencers who can barely spell MOSAIC, that this will result in a delay for the final rule.
Well, it very well may end up with a 90-day delay, but rulemaking is defined by law. And the FAA has certain deadlines they must meet. And so when you have a comment period, they have a specified amount of time to dispense of comments. And that time doesn't change. And so it may shift the window 90 days, but it doesn't change it significantly. And I heard at Oshkosh that the target with the FAA is still the end of 2024. That hasn't changed a bit. I don't anticipate this changing that.
Excellent. What are you learning from the rule overall? I mean, is there any broad observation on your part about what was written and what needs to be done?
We've had 30 years of rulemaking. The first proposal for a MOSAIC-like approach to recreational aircraft was actually introduced in the mid-'80s, primary category. And so the reality is that in 1989 there was an NPRM from the same applicants who are the applicants for MOSAIC for the same arguments as we have for MOSAIC, with the same intended consequence as we have for MOSAIC. However, published in the 1992 final rule, the FAA came up with different conclusions than they have proposed in MOSAIC. And so, for instance, this 54 knots for a sport pilot isn't supported by the 1992 rule, but in fact, 61 knots is supported by the 1992 rule. And so, using the FAA's own words, the stall speed for a sport pilot should be 61 knots, not 54 knots. It's reading the history and understanding the regulatory process. We currently have today, we have 5 tiers of recreational aircraft if we consider speeds, that's all. 24 knots for 103, 45 knots for LSA, 61 knots for primary category, and then 250 V&E for Class 1 and Class 2 Part 23. So we have 5 categories of aircraft and recreational aircraft. I don't know what we're trying to accomplish. It requires review and to fully understand this. And that's why we're taking the time to do it right. We're taking the time to read the proposal, to actually decipher the proposal. We're going back, we're looking at the preamble and the pre-preamble language in the 80s to what the FAA was trying to accomplish with the last time they did this. We're looking at the preamble language in the 2004 regulation for light sport aircraft. We're looking at all of this so that we can have that safety continuum that everybody talks about that is so essential for a healthy and vibrant general aviation. But the FAA has decoupled sport pilot from LSA. That's rock solid. But why isn't sport pilot going to primary category? And I don't have that answer. And so these are the types of research we're doing.
You're going to have to keep us up to date on this. I'm going to have to revisit this with you down the line, and certainly by the time we get to Dallas, we should have a bit more information and maybe clear the fog a little bit. But again, I sure appreciate your time. You've been probably the most expert I know in clearing the fog out of the regulatory environment. So please stay in touch.
Will do. It's my pleasure.